Greetings, fellow football managers. Today we are going to answer the question, can player traits demolish your tactics in Football Manager 2024? Short answer, yes. Thank you for watching. No. Actually, yes. And to jump right into it, I'm going to focus on three different things today. First of all, it stands to reason that even the best player traits, quote unquote best, can actually destroy your tactics if the player who has it isn't quite suitable for the job, if the player is not comparable to the others in your team or the team you're playing against or the level you're playing against or something like that. You need certain attributes to get the job done. A player who, for example, likes to dribble but has low dribbling flair, agility, pace and all of that is obviously going to struggle, and that will have a negative impact on your tactics unless you're playing at a low enough level where those attributes are actually serviceable. For more info on attributes, just check out this video up here. We've gone into detail about it before. The second thing that we need to look at is before you play a game, before you go into a match, you will get a screen like this one. This is kind of looking at the player's happiness and their body language and their mental state at the particular tactics that you're playing, how those jive with that player themselves, with their ambition level, with what you have discussed previously, what kind of context you have given them in terms of the expectations to the season, your team talks, track record, and stuff like that. The point here is that if you have a player trait, for example, dribbles often, but you tell that player via a PI not to dribble, there's going to be a slight problem there. The player won't be too happy because you're giving him instructions that don't correspond to the type of player he is. So a mismatch between a player trait and the instruction that you want to give them via a role or a PI doesn't necessarily demolish your tactic right here, but it does get the player into a bad mental state, or at least reduces their mental state, so that can have an effect on on-pitch performance. The meat and drink of this video, though, is a selection of traits that, in my view, are quite dangerous and you need to look out for based on what kind of football you're going to play. That's not to say that all of these are bad traits. There are only a couple of traits that I would actually consider quote-unquote bad traits. Other traits are just they define how the player plays, what they like to do, and so on. A lot of the traits that I'm actually going to mention could be considered as good traits, depending on what kind of football you're trying to play. But I think you do need to watch out for these traits and make sure that these traits are not present on the wrong kind of player in your team or in your tactics. Just to point out as well, you'll see on the screen I have the new player search function opened up, so when you are searching for a player in range, you can actually search for them using this. I know a lot of people like to buy players using this search screen. Others like to do it through the scouting screen, and you can find player traits this way as well. So you can filter by players who have a trait, or in this list, for example, you might be able to filter players who don't have this trait. So we'll click on new search, then we'll go to condition over here, click the drop down and then find general, and right there is player trait. And now you can choose from all of the available traits. Now this video is not going to go into detail on how to get each of these traits. Most of them come by training. You can actually train a lot of these traits onto your players. Some of them cannot be acquired like that. Some have to be acquired by mentoring. I think there's a couple that actually can't be acquired at all. The point of this video is some of these traits do ruin your tactics. The universal bad ones, first of all. For me, there are only two that I absolutely do not like. One of them is dwells on ball. The other one is argues with officials right up here. Now, argues with officials is just straight up an increased risk of getting a yellow card for dissent. And especially this week with the news of the possible blue card trials in the lower leagues of football, and then maybe in a couple of higher competitions next year, arguing with officials would get even worse. Nowadays, it's pretty variable when players get a yellow card, when they don't. For dissent, we've seen some really odd instances where the start of this season, if you watch the Premier League, players were getting a lot of dissent yellow cards. Now it's very situational. It feels like now every time they make that punching motion with their hand, kind of punch the air, they turn away and punch the air, that seems to be an automatic yellow card. But just moaning at the referee all game doesn't seem to be a yellow card. It's very, very weird. In the days of yore, this used to be a very, very interesting one. You'd have guys like, I think Mark van Bommel especially, the old Dutch captain in, for example, World Cup 2006. I think he was the Dutch captain there. Used to play in a double pivot with Nigel de Jong for a while. He was playing for Bayern Munich, I think. But as the captain of the team, now I think we're seeing Martin Odegaard kind of play that same role. They're just always in the official's ear. Mark van Bommel was very interesting because he used to really pal up with the referee, try and get on the referee's good side, be friends, laughing and joking, and then smash into a two-footed tackle and go, me? No, that wasn't me, ref. Look, we're such good friends. You can't yellow card me for that, ref. It was really interesting to watch the way he used to do that. That's why a lot of captains used to be that kind of defensive midfielder, holding midfielder. That used to be a legitimate tactic. Van Bommel, I think, was also married to the Dutch coach's daughter or something like that. So he was a fairly powerful guy in football. Okay, dwells on ball is a little bit more nuanced. Basically, a guy who dwells on ball will just take a long time to make a decision. So dwells on ball can kind of mess you up if you're playing on a higher tempo, if you like to see fluid kind of football. Like a lot of you, I like to play football in Football Manager that I enjoy watching, and for me that tends to be a high tempo, fluid kind of football, and dwells on ball takes away from that, where a player just holds on to the ball for a long time, longer than is necessary, and that is the problem there. So you might see a pass open up or a chance for a through ball or something, and he just doesn't take it on because he has this trait. That can be pretty frustrating. And that was a big concern that a lot of Liverpool fans, for example, had with Curtis Jones. He doesn't have dwells on ball in the game, but it felt like for a while he had it in real life. And that really gets to people, gets to fans, gets to me especially. I like to see faster play. And maybe you like to see faster play as well. So this could kind of ruin your quick, fluid football if you have a couple of players or just one player in a vital area who has this particular thing. Okay, universally bad was argues with officials because of yellow cards, dwells on ball because it slows play down a lot, and sometimes it takes away from fluid kind of attacking play. It also doesn't take advantage of opportunities as soon as it sees them. That can be a problem. So let's jump into some of the others, and we'll start with midfield. I would like to have a look at 4 midfield traits that I really don't like having unless I'm buying a player for that particular position. Now, if I'm looking at a holding midfielder, again, if you want to know about holding midfielders, take a look at my defensive midfielders video, which is up here. And I'll link the central midfielders video in a moment as well. Those 2 videos will talk about midfielder roles and holding midfielders quite well. And if I've got a player in that holding midfield role or somebody I want to stay back outside the box, maybe command the area just outside the box, I do not want this trait. Gets forward whenever possible. This one basically just makes the player make forward runs all of the time, so I don't want that, especially if I want him on the ball a little bit more or if I want him in a holding position. This is a little bit of a problem. Also, if we look at the top name there, Kyle Walker, if you want to play him as a defensive fullback, this trait is going to be a problem. Why would you want to play Kyle Walker as a defensive fullback? Because he's age 35 right now. At this kind of age, he will start to lose his pace, even though he still has 15, and then 16, he's starting to lose it. So if he keeps playing to age 36, 37, and you have somebody like Kyle Walker, you might want to use him as a defensive player. And then the gets forward whenever possible is going to conflict a little bit. Not a huge amount because he does have 16 teamwork, therefore he should listen to you for the most part, but it will conflict a little bit. That being said, we were talking about midfielders, somebody like a Camavinga. It's difficult to use him as a holding player because of gets forward whenever possible. So immediately there's a problem. The game tells you that his best role and duty is ball-winning midfielder, defend. So be careful if you're managing a team like Real Madrid and you have a guy like Camavinga as your holding midfielder and he has gets forward whenever possible, that could become a problem for you. And you might have the occasional situation where he is out of position. That being said, he has a lot of stamina. His stamina is 19, his work rate is 18, so he will try and get back into that position. His decisions is also 16, so he will probably not get out of position too much because he's a fairly smart player. In fact, his football intelligence is very, very high. I've actually seen a video of him or two of him answering some quiz questions, and he seems just like a smart guy in general. So he shouldn't abandon that holding midfield role too much for you, but it is very possible. And obviously, he's not the only player with this trait whose best role is defensive, so be very, very careful. Another one to look at, and it's very, very similar, if we just take this one off, it arrives late in opponent's area. This is a really fun trait, and the poster boy for it is somebody like Frank Lampard. It's basically getting into the area unmarked a little bit later the player will stay outside of the box just a few moments longer before getting in. So this could again be a problem on a holding player, but it could also be a problem on an attacking central midfielder or an attacking midfielder on an attack duty, where your idea is let's get them into the box to be a second striker, basically, even a first striker if your striker is a false nine. But then you have this trait and he will actually delay his run until later. So that can be a bit of a problem, and that'll allow the defense to kind of push up and dominate the box. So you want this in a player who's getting into the box from kind of a central midfielder support or a box-to-box midfielder support. Somebody like a Jorginho Wijnaldum is okay because he's kind of a box-to-box player. So that would be fine. Arrives late is very powerful on a player like that. It can, however, be a problem on other players. Thomas Souček is a really nice choice for this trait because he's a huge guy. I think he's 6'5". He's got jumping of 17, strength of 16. He's dominant in the air. So you do want him getting into the box. And late is kind of when the fullbacks are going to put that cross in. So that can be a big source of goals for you. But if you play him as a central midfielder attack, he might not be getting into the box quickly enough for your wingers to hit him with a cross. So that's why I think this one could break your tactics a little bit. The next trait I want to look at is shoots from distance. Let's try and find this one. This one I think is not so good for both midfielders and for strikers. Midfielders because sometimes you can have midfielders taking pot shots from silly areas, and some of the players who actually do it may not be very good at shooting in the first place. Personally, I remember having Daniel Sturridge in Football Manager some 10 years ago, and he just used to shoot from distance all the time. I know that's more of a striker problem, and I wanted him to get into the box and shoot, not shoot from outside of the box, but he used to do it and frustrate me no end, and it used to take me months to try and train that trait out of him. On midfielders, though, it can be kind of the same thing. They'll give away useful positions where they could play another pass or play a through ball or something, and instead they take on a really low percentage shot. You might not want to see it when there was a better option there. And obviously a shot can then turn over possession. It can just go harmlessly out for a goal kick, which is again a possession turnover. So you're wasting a good move. Especially if it's a 50-50 game or you're the underdog, shoots from distance can be a bad one in some situations. Then again, if you are the underdog, sometimes shoots from distance can be good because the percentage chance of actually scoring could be a little bit higher because the better team may not have as many players back. So weigh it up however you will. The problem is you may not be able to work the ball into the box as effectively if you have a midfielder which shoots from distance. The last one I want to focus on is very, very interesting. In fact, it is plays no through balls. For me, this one's a lot rarer, and it's not as common in midfielders anymore. It used to be a thing on, for example, Bastian Schweinsteiger, player that I used to absolutely love. I kind of fell in love with his performance in 2006 when he scored those 2 goals for Germany, playing in kind of a left midfield role, cutting inside. Very much ahead of its time, but he was also very much a midfield player rather than a winger. But he just cut inside and smashed the ball in. It was the Jabulani as well, so it was worth gambling. And it looked like the German team had kind of mastered the Jabulani. They scored 4 goals or something in their first game in that World Cup, with Lahm opening the scoring. Torsten Frings scored a massive goal, I think 35 yards out, something like that. And Schweinsteiger seemed to have control over the Jabulani as well. Obviously, he turned out into a huge midfielder for Germany, wonderfully determined, stalwart Bayern Munich player, but I used to never pick him up in Football Manager because he didn't play any through balls. So that, for me, was a big problem because I personally like my central midfielders to always have an eye open for the through ball. I often have an attacking winger running down the line or an inside forward who's ready to score from one of the midfielders' through passes. Maybe an advanced forward who's waiting on the shoulder as well. So that doesn't work with my play style. If your playstyle wants a shorter passing thing, prioritizing possession, and maybe you just have a guy who doesn't have that much vision or passing reach, yeah, okay, train plays no through balls on him, fine. It can also be pretty decent on a fullback, somebody like a Ben Johnson, for example. If he gets into attacking areas, you don't really want him playing a through ball with vision 10 and passing 10, but he has crossing 13, so you want him to go with that instead, and plays no through balls could be good for him. If we look at this guy, Trezeguet, passing 14, vision 12, not great, but then he has high crossing, high dribbling, high finishing. So obviously, again, that will restrict him more to those attributes, and that's a good thing. But somebody like a Schweinsteiger, for me, I would have wanted him to play through balls. Okay, those 4 are the ones that I like to look out for in midfield. Obviously, there are plenty of other player traits that you can look at and say, this could be a bit of a problem here and there. But generally speaking, these are the ones that can really affect your tactic negatively. Stuff like plays no through balls obviously will restrict the player what they do with passing. Somebody else will have to play through balls. Shoots from distance can give up good opportunities. And the movement ones, forward whenever possible, arrives late into opponent's area. There's another one, gets into opposition area, for example. All of those can actually get a player a bit too far forward, too often, too early, too late. Those can affect your tactics a little bit. So just look out for them and play around them. Be aware of them. Or just train them out if you need to. Gets forward whenever possible is a really common one, and you'll see it on really good players. But those players are able to finish. They are able to be a danger in the box. So that's why they have them. However, you have cases like Trent Alexander-Arnold, for example. It's difficult in Football Manager to play him in defensive midfield if you want to do that, if you're in that camp. It's difficult, number one, because his mental attributes don't seem great in Football Manager, but also he has this trait, so he kind of vacates his position a little bit as well. That can be a bit of a problem. Okay, let's go up into forwards. Again, we're not looking at quote-unquote bad traits. Shoots from distance is not a bad trait. You could have a player catching keepers out by surprise, but maybe it's not what you want to see in your tactical setup. You could be wanting to play in a different system or play in a different style. One of the first traits to look out for is this one, plays with back to goal. This one can make or break your striker. Take a look at this video up here, striker roles. You may already have seen it, you may not. If you haven't, it looks at a lot of the different roles that you can choose for your strikers, and plays with back to goal is very dependent on role. If you have a guy who is an advanced forward, a fast striker, do not give him this trait, or if he has this trait, don't play him as an advanced forward because it will fail. Advanced forward is trying to push forward, he's trying to make runs in behind, but plays with back to goal is very much a target man thing. If you look at all of the names on this list, Mitrovic, Tadic, Haller, Scamacca, Solar, these are all massive guys. These are all target man profiles. These are all big, strong strikers who get the ball from the rest of the team, hold up the ball, and then lay it off into other players. So it is a classic target man trait. Do not try and put this on your poacher or an advanced forward, or don't play a guy who has this trait as a poacher, advanced forward, stuff like that. Here's another one. Comes deep to get ball. Let me try and find it. This one. I actually love this trait because it gets guys like midfielders more involved in the game. And as you can see, a lot of playmaker profiles tend to have this trait. Guys like Kimmich, Partey, not really a playmaker, but Thiago definitely is. Kevin De Bruyne, Vitinha, Odegaard, Frankie de Jong, all of these guys, and Harry Kane, by the way, deep lying forward, creative forward, he has it too. So you have that kind of player who drops off their position, comes deeper, picks up the ball, and then does something with it. The point here, it tends to be a creative player thing. So passing and vision, once they come deep to get the ball, what do they do with it? Again, if you want Harry Kane to play as your poacher or advanced forward or something like that, be aware of this trait because it does mean he will drop off that position and allow the defense to come at you and just compress the pitch. Again, it won't stretch them out. It might be a good way of getting a striker like a Kane, a Trequartista, someone like that, on the ball a little more, get them scoring goals, get them doing different things, but it isn't so good for that advanced forward, that poacher kind of role. The last one I want you to watch out for is this one. Let's find the word L, because likes to try to beat offside trap. This one has frustrated me so much. And as you can see, again, we're looking at a different type of player once more. We're looking at the poachers. We're looking at Haaland. We're looking at Rashford. To be fair, he's an inside forward, but then again, when he plays up front, he's on the shoulder. We're kind of looking at those on-the-shoulder players, Mauro Icardi, Ciro Immobile, Ollie Watkins. If Filippo Inzaghi was still playing, he would have this. In fact, he would need his own trait. Born offside, I think, is the one. The problem with this trait is unless the player has really good decision making, really good anticipation, really good off the ball, they are going to be offside a lot because they are incorporating that risk into their game. So be careful if you have a player who doesn't quite have those stats, he's going to be offside all the time. Be careful if you have a creative kind of striker. If you want to take Erling Haaland and use him as a complete forward support, if you are a mad lad, you might try that. Fair enough. Look, this guy has basically 20 in everything. You can do what you want with him. He has passing 14, vision 14. So he could play as a Trequartista in a Premier League, in the Champions League. he could do the job. The problem is he likes to beat the offside trap, so he's going to be in the wrong position to do it. He has the attributes for it. It's just the positional issue of this player trait will make it impossible. Or not impossible, but just a little bit difficult. Okay, let's move across to wingers. I've separated this into wingers. I know I've looked at midfield and then forward, but wingers for me are their own category because they're doing something so different. For me, the movement traits are big, very, very big. One is hugs line or hugs touch line as it's sometimes called. The other one is cuts inside. So you have cuts inside from both wings, left wing and right wing. Point is, it defines how wide or narrow they play. So if you're playing a winger support or winger attack, and you have cuts inside, that's going to define the amount of width they give to your team. So for me, I don't actually like these. I know most players have them. I can guarantee you Mohamed Salah will be the first name on this list. Okay, he isn't, because he's in my team on this save. That's why he's not on this list. But Saka's up here. And my boy, my favorite young person with a misspelled name, Anthony, is on this list as well. And Rooney Baji, who is basically a discount Salah. All of these guys have this trait, so it means that they will not hold the width very, very well unless they have high teamwork and you're playing them as a winger. They're definitely going to try and come inside the field as much as they can. So they can't really play as an out-and-out winger, or they won't be as effective. Same thing goes with Hugs line. That guy may not be as good as an inside forward or an inverted winger. To be fair, you can absolutely make it work if you want to play like a Manchester City tactic where your winger is actually just holding width like a Doku and then getting to the corner flag and then cutting inside. Fair enough. That would be absolutely what you want. You play them as a winger, they have cut inside. Perfect. That's what you want to see. But generally, that's not what managers want to see. They want a winger to be going wide and crossing. They want the inside player cut in straight away, not stay wide with the ball, if you get what I mean. So movement traits in general, we've looked at a couple of movement traits, for example, in the midfield as well. Be careful of movement traits because they could pull players into positions where you don't want them to be in. Another one I don't like, and this is part movement, part not movement. It is likes ball played into feet. This is a really interesting one because it actually can be very useful for some positions. As you can see, it's mostly the playmakers. You have kind of the creative players in this. Sancho is a winger, but he's mostly a ball player. He's a creative player. He's not really a fast flying out and out winger. My issue with this is a guy called Ben Doak at Liverpool has it. And I generally have one Liverpool save going at any point in time, and Doak has this trait. And the problem there is he can't really stretch the pitch early. I generally bring him on as kind of a young player in the 60th, 65th minute when I've got the game 1-2-0, and then I drop my block back. I try to play a bit more counter-attacking, use all the space, and get some of those guys goals. I get them game time and a couple of goals. I make it 3-0, 4-0, 5-0 by playing on the counter after I've basically got the game won. And one way to do that is actually to stretch the pitch and play somebody like a winger and get the ball out there early. The problem is Doak, with this trait, he comes a little bit deeper. He asks for the ball to his feet. That gives him a zero velocity start. And this is a really fast player you're talking about. If you play the ball in behind to him, he is gone. No defender's catching him up. The problem is he's getting the ball kind of standing and then he needs to accelerate. Even though his acceleration and agility are really good, it still slowed the game down enough that my tactic, my fast-paced counterattack has fallen flat. So again, insanely powerful trait, but if you're playing a counter-attacking system or a fast-paced direct system, likes ball played to feet can be a little bit of a problem. It could be cool on your playmaker, the guy you kind of rely on to get the ball out, but not the guy who gets the ball at the end on the flank trying to go for a one-on-one. Not really what you want. Okay, the next one I want to talk about for wingers is likes to beat opponent repeatedly. This is a really interesting one because when you see it in real life, you love it. It's very much a flair thing and you love to see it. In Football Manager, sometimes you do not love to see it. Especially if you're the better team, sometimes doing that slows down the move. It keeps the player a little bit isolated. It's like, make space and get the cross in, dude. Make space, play it, shoot, whatever it is. But if you try and cut in and then beat the player again, you're just compressing everything, and then there's enough time for the defense to come back to block it out, for the guy to get double marked. It can be a bit of a pain in some situations. So I'm not going to say it's a bad trait. It can just slow things down a little bit in certain situations. Sometimes there's also not enough space to pull it out if you're the better team, so that can be a problem as well. Okay, talking about slowing things down, there's one trait which I really don't like very much, and that is stops play. This can be okay, again, in certain situations if you're trying to play a certain style. I find that if you want to play kind of a third man passing style like Brighton, if you want to do De Zerbi style stuff, stops play can be really good on your centre backs because they stop the ball, slow it down. The moment they get pressed, then they make the pass. So that's kind of what you want if you're playing that style of play. The problem is if your wingers have this, you just bring the game down to a standstill up front. Okay, last of all, we're going to go into defense. Again, gets forward whenever possible is a bit of a problem. Stays back at all times is the opposite to that. That can be tricky on players like wingbacks. If you want a player to play like Andy Robertson, but he has stays back at all times, that can be a real pain in the neck. I'm not actually going to show it. I'm not going to drop the list because there are two traits I'm going to focus on, and one is dives into tackles. This is a very, very interesting one. You can see that some of the world's best defenders have this, but if we look at their profiles, they fall into a very, very interesting kind of category. Look at this guy's aggression and bravery. His aggression is extremely high. Gavi's an interesting one, but again, super high aggression. Casemiro's aggression, whoa, look at that. We have Nicolo Barella, very, very high aggression. Matthijs de Ligt, however you say, Licht, I don't know. However you say his name, very, very high aggression, slightly lower anticipation. So dives into tackles is an interesting one because it's using the player's aggression and bravery to try and his physical strength as well, to try and win the ball rather than his reading of the game. And this can be quite tricky because if the guy misses the tackle, obviously high tackling rating is good. You have tackling 15 there, which is fine. Barella has tackling 16. Luca Hernandez has tackling 17. So high tackling rate, technically, the ability to actually successfully tackle is vital to this trait because if it goes wrong, basically the player gets behind you and then you're in real trouble. So personally, I like to have a standoff defense. I usually do this from a tactical standpoint, which I will talk about in a future video as well, but dives into tackles can just get a player out of position making the tackle when they don't have to, when they could just stand off a little bit longer. And that could mess up your last line of defense. It could mess up your pressing structure a little bit. If you're trying to play compact, you're trying to play structured, you're trying to rely on intercepting, waiting for the mistake, just being compact, blocking stuff, dives into tackles can actually let you down. The last one, again, maybe a controversial pick here because a lot of the best players have this. It is marks opponent tightly. Again, look at those defenders. You've got some really good ones. Maybe not as good as the last list, but guys like Ugarte are fantastic players in Football Manager as well as in real life. And marking the opponent tightly can be, again, a little bit tricky. Because if you have one guy marking tightly, that can kind of leave other gaps in your defensive structure. So if one centre-back marks tightly and just goes with the forward, that opens up a pocket of space. If you have, let's say, your right back and your right centre-back marking tightly on the other side, you've got the opposition winger then by the fullback, and you've got the opposition striker with the centre-back, then the opposition can just throw a box-to-box midfielder or a Mezzala or someone in there, and then you're in trouble. An inverted fullback or inverted wingback rather on attack. Then you're in trouble because it's 3-on-2 and the other two guys are so busy marking that they're not going to pick up the new player. So again, if you're playing a tight marking system, this isn't a bad thing. If you've just by nature of your formation and your defensive setup, if you've got enough players back, if you are countering the opposition's formation with your formation, making sure that all the runners are covered, again, this is okay. But this can let you down in certain situations when it's just on the knife edge, player to player, and then you just have one guy tight marking. And then when the striker moves away, if he moves into channels, for example, your defender goes with him, and suddenly the center is open. That can be a problem. It is not the end of the world again, but it can be a problem. I hope you've enjoyed this. These are a bunch of traits that you do need to look out for a little bit when you're setting up your tactics. Just make sure that your players are not doing funky things that you haven't anticipated. And you're thinking, why is my holding midfielder getting into the box? Oh, okay. He gets forward whenever possible. Right. Either I train that out of him or I play somebody else as a holding midfielder. So I would love to hear what other player traits you guys look out for when you're setting up tactics. Obviously, a lot of player traits out there are amazing. I'll do a future video on this. Stuff like dictate tempo can be absolutely fantastic. But there are some of these traits like we've covered today. Things like movement, gets forward, doesn't get forward at all, arrives late. Things like plays no through balls, like plays with back to goal, likes ball plays into feet, those kind of traits can actually have a negative impact sometimes in certain situations, and they should be watched out for. If you've got any more like these, drop them in the comments below. Sometimes the best value is in the comments, so always have a look there. Thank you so much. I'll talk to you down below. Cheers!